Hello, this is Alan Zindel with Political Dharma, and today I have a guest that I'll be interviewing. This is Sarah Wolk, the Executive Director of the Equal Vote Coalition, and we're going to be talking about a set of ballot initiatives that just failed to pass or did pass on the reverse side of the issue in about a half a dozen states. Those are open primary and ranked choice voting ballot measures, so-called in each case. So that didn't sound very clear to me, but let's start with you, Sarah. Do you want to identify what Equal Vote Coalition does?
Sure. So we are a national nonprofit. We're mostly volunteer-led and explicitly nonpartisan, and we focus on fighting for true equality in the vote itself, specifically with a lens on voting method reform. So that's the way we fill out our ballots, the way we vote.
Okay. And I should say, as a matter of disclosure here, that I have been, or you have been, we've been colleagues for about 7 years now in voting reform efforts and also friends for just about as long as we came to know each other. So we had these ballot initiatives, some some trying to propose so-called open primaries, which is different than what used to be called open primaries, and some about ranked choice voting, which is a generic term for a lot of different types of ranking system, but this is a particular type. So I just want to say that for the sake of clarity. But these ballot initiatives concerned either open primaries or ranked choice voting or some combination of the two. And overall, they did very poorly. Do you have some ideas of what happened there?
I do. So unfortunately, this is something that we saw coming, that we predicted, and that we've been very concerned about for a long time. And it really comes down to getting the details right. Electoral reform is a wonky policy topic. And while a number of people out there in the electoral reform space may have good intentions, certainly the volunteers all across the issue have good intentions and are coming from the right place. Some of these reforms are good. Some of them can cause serious unintended impacts, and some of them actually create serious new issues that are worse than the issues that they're actually solving. And there's quite a bit of telling people what they want to hear and overselling electoral reform too. And then last but not least, there's straight up corruption in which people put forward reforms that they know don't do the things that they're claiming, and they actually have other goals.
Oh,
So,
corruption. That's pretty strong word.
yeah, unfortunately, I think the anti-corruption space is not immune to corruption, just like the whole rest of politics. We have to
Hmm.
remember that this is politics. There are massive things to be won and lost, and there's a status quo with interests, and there's also uh, an a kind of status quo reform community.
So there can be big stakes involved, and you would expect there to be money on each side, having some interest in the outcome, trying to persuade voters. But I think I interrupted you. Did you finish what you initially were saying?
I did, but I have more that I wanted to say. So, um, you know, when we're talking about like what problem are we solving
Right.
on this issue, it really is the phenomena where I'm going to vote and the front runners are not looking very attractive, but I don't want to throw my vote away on somebody who can't win. I want to vote for somebody who's electable. I want to vote for the front runner on my side who I think can win. I don't want to split the vote or end up electing, having my candidate spoil the election and throw the election to the other side. So, as electoral reformers, we have some serious issues getting this fundamental problem clearly stated to the public, because first off, most people don't know what the current system's called. It's called plurality voting, first past the post, where you vote for one candidate only and the candidate with the most votes wins. And then most people don't know what the problem is called. So vote splitting is where a majority coalition or a majority faction can run multiple similar candidates, end up splitting what would be a majority between these and ending up divided and conquered. So you can end up with a majority opposed candidate actually winning. And that is the fundamental problem that drives lesser evil voting, strategic voting. It also drives voters to, fall in line with one of the two major parties. And over time, in every country who's done it or who uses choose one plurality voting, it leads to two-party domination. And then over time, it leads to more and more hyper-polarized two-party domination, where the strategy is to demonize the other side, and there's really not much to be gained by consensus.
So the attractiveness to voters, the pitch to voters anyway, is that we're talking specifically about ranked choice voting right now, not so much about the open primary side of it. But the pitch to voters is that you want to feel more freedom to vote for, or at least consider other candidates and parties, independent candidates, other smaller parties, if they're attractive to you, and not feel like when you vote for them, you've wasted your vote, or even worse, cause some kind of a spoiler election that would help elect a candidate you like even less than the other major party candidates. So that's a big part of the attractiveness to voters. Um, the other piece you were mentioning is that when you end up with these just two major parties, there's hyperpolarization, and so people don't like that as well. And I think with the open primary side of it, which we don't have to talk about right now, the big attraction is the idea that more people can have a say in the major party primaries, rather than being limited to two candidates from major parties, in which those candidates are chosen very, very small segment of the overall voting public.
Right. So at the Equal Vote Coalition, we have 5 pillars that we use to kind of evaluate voting methods. And, obviously we want to level the playing field. We want the process to be fair, equal, inclusive. We want, whoever wants to step up and run for office and do a good job, we want them to be able to do that fair and square. So equality is our first principle. Your vote should be just as powerful as mine, no matter who I am, what party I'm in, where I live, how many candidates are running on my side, any of that. Second is honesty. We want to be able to vote our conscience. We want it to be smart to vote your conscience. You shouldn't have to be a strategic voter. Third, it should be simple. Voters should be able to fill out their ballots and vote and navigate the process easily. It should be auditable, secure, easy to tally. Fourth is expressive. We need enough data from voters to be able to find the best winner. So if we're just letting people show who's your favorite, but there's 30 candidates, as we saw in recent Portland, Oregon City Council election, voters need to be able to show more information to be able to find the best winner in that kind of situation.
Did you get through all 5 principles? I've lost track.
I believe there's one more. So we've got equality, simplicity, expressiveness, honesty, and last but not least, accuracy. So we want to accurately elect the correct candidate, which is whoever would best represent the will of the people. So, in a politically diverse swing state, that might be somebody who's more moderate. In a very progressive or liberal place, that's going to be somebody progressive or liberal. And in somebody in a conservative place, that's somebody who might be more conservative. But regardless, there is definitely, we want to have winners who are broadly representative. So let's say there's a candidate out there who is the favorite of 51% of the voters, but they're plan is to like enslave everybody else. That's not going to be a broadly representative great candidate. That's a highly polarizing candidate. And a better voting method would say, yeah, we want to find somebody who has the support of a majority, but there might be somebody who has a majority, but is at least somewhat representative of the whole, not just their faction.
You could also say that is the difference between a majority and a wider majority. Because
Mhm.
if you know more about people's preferences for the various candidates, they could show that, yeah, this one may be my favorite, but this one over here is just as acceptable to me. So
Yeah.
you've outlined these five principles and they sound very attractive. Where does ranked choice voting fail in those measures?
So it really fails in a lot of measures. It does make it it's more expressive. You can show your preferences between the candidates, first choice, second choice, third choice. Um, Unfortunately, you can't show, is my second choice as good as my favorite or almost as good as my favorite? Or is my second choice really a lesser evil who I don't like, but there's somebody worse out there that I'm worried about? So it has serious issues with equality. In our professional opinion, it doesn't pass one person, one vote. There's a number of ways that some voters can have their vote wasted or not counted or have their vote not have as much power as somebody else's because of the tabulation. In terms of accuracy, this is something that can be tested and studied. It tests roughly on par with like a top two primary. So the California system, it does a tiny bit better in some cases, but not much. Um, so in terms of where it falls compared to other voting methods, it's not worse, but it's close to second to worst or third to worst.
And the worst
So
being what we generally use in the United States.
in terms of accuracy, the worst is like the basic plurality in which you vote for one candidate and a number of candidates advance in the general election. And then, much like we would use for our national offices like Senate or House.
So the voting system most people are familiar with. Well, not many of the voters who voted on these initiatives are going to be aware of all those ways of evaluating ranked choice voting. What do you think it was that really turned them against it? So it sounds attractive on the face of it, and it does fail certain measures, but measures that they wouldn't necessarily know a lot about. So what was going on there? In the past, I would say past, people bought into it and it was making a lot of progress. Now,
Yeah.
with this election, it seems to have just stopped in its tracks.
Yeah. So, I think this is where telling our own story with it is relevant because Alan, I know you worked on ranked choice voting, you were active in that space, you collect signatures for it. I also was a big ranked choice voting fan and volunteer for years. And what attracted me to it was the pitch. So people will often hear, it's safe to vote your conscience with ranked choice voting. If your favorite can't win, your next choice will be counted. And you don't have to worry about wasting your vote. It eliminates vote splitting and the spoiler effect. So it gets representative winners. And all of those, and it breaks two-party domination and guarantees majority winners. So unfortunately, once I did a deeper dive and you did a deeper dive, we did a research committee looking at different voting methods. We found out that all of those claims I just said are false. You can qualify them. You can say, it might help elect more majority preferred winners, but you can't say it guarantees a majority. It's not necessarily safe to vote for your conscience. Your vote can be wasted in new ways. And so what we've seen is ranked choice voting has a massive lobby. Just this last election cycle, our preliminary estimates of the money that's above board, not counting dark money, are that they spent close to $100 million on this last election cycle and slate of reforms around the country. And when you have that type of money lobbying behind a proposal, what they do is they just poll test what people want to hear, and then they tell them that. So ranked choice has been very systematically oversold, but then once it's adopted, what we've seen is it works pretty well in a non-controversial election in a small local scale. If there's only two frontrunners, it works fine. But if there's multiple viable candidates, if there's lots of voters, or if it's especially adopted statewide or in a larger jurisdiction, that's where the flaws really come to the surface. And so we've had some big elections now, including the first election statewide in Alaska after they adopted it, where the results just absolutely disproved every single claim that voters had been told. And so that obviously sparked massive national backlash.
And yeah, the Alaska one was a big illustration for people paying attention or even semi-paying attention that this didn't work the way it was advertised. And I know a lot of Republicans were especially against it because they saw that they lost the congressional seat that previously they had, and they blamed it on this system. There's been other failures as well, maybe not as well known, but very similar.
Yeah, so in Burlington, Vermont, we had an election with three competitive candidates, two on the left, one on the right, and the Democrat, who was kind of the more moderate candidate in the middle, was preferred head to head over all others, but he lost the election. So that's what we call the center squeeze. It's the ranked choice spoiler effect, where a candidate in the middle has to compete with people to the left and the right. And the systems just mathematically can hurt candidates in the middle and help more polarizing candidates. So if we're looking for a system to help combat polarization, to help combat two-party domination, a system that's actually got a built-in bias against those consensus middle candidates is going to be a big problem. And that's, that happened in Burlington, it hurt the Democrat, but in Alaska, it actually ended up helping the Democrat. So in Alaska, we had a seat that was historically Republican. 60% of voters preferred one of the two Republicans that ran. The two Republicans split the vote and elected a Democrat to this seat, even though the centrist Republican was preferred head-to-head over all other candidates, was preferred by a majority over the winner. And, to lay people, they're like, what? How could that possibly happen? And to try and explain it simply, I think the biggest takeaway, if you take away one thing from this video, is that in ranked choice, even though you're ranking your candidates, those rankings might not be counted. And in competitive elections, in the elections where it really matters, often most of the rankings that voters will put on their ballot will be ignored. It depends on the order of elimination, which rankings are counted, and they really are just discarding data that might be actually relevant.
Okay. So the narrative then would be ranked choice voting had been having successes at the ballot box because it was oversold. And then people interested in voting reform started to notice more and more the ways that it could fail. And as it was adopted, there were examples that people could see where it did fail in the ways that were predicted. And so your takeaway from this is that because ranked choice voting is not best of art voting reform, and it was oversold, now people are becoming very doubtful about going forward. And I would think because with Alaska, it was a combination of a so-called open primary where all the candidates run together and all the voters can vote on anyone, and then a ranked choice voting in the general election. Open primaries took a hit as well, just because it was associated with ranked choice voting and the general topic of voting reform. Does that pretty much what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think where open primaries fits in is that a lot of people want open primaries. They want to be able to vote for candidates regardless of political party in our country right now, and I think especially right now, even in the last couple months, a lot of people are feeling politically homeless. They're not strongly identifying with one party or the other, and they're feeling very disillusioned. So it's very natural to say, I want to be able to vote for the best candidate, regardless what party they're running under. And in order to do that, you need an open primary. But the problem is when you have more candidates running against each other on the same ballot, the risk of splitting the vote between similar candidates and having a spoiler goes up. So if we want to have open primaries, we need a more accurate voting method that eliminates vote splitting and the spoiler effect. So it's safe for voters to vote their conscience without worrying about voting lesser evil. So people have probably already figured out Equal Vote Coalition does oppose ranked choice voting. We think it's got serious deal breakers that are not acceptable. But we support a number of other better voting reforms, including star voting, approval voting, and ranked robin. So the way to solve this problem is allow voters to be more expressive, whether that's allowing them to show who they support on a traditional looking ballot, but approve more than one candidate if they like more than one, whether that's on a ranked ballot, ranking all the candidates and then having the system actually count all those rankings instead of ignore a bunch, or our favorite, star voting, where voters score the candidates from 0 up to 5 stars, and there's a top 2 runoff where your full vote goes to the finalist you prefer, and you get a majority preferred winner who is broadly supported.
So you and I both know something of the history of ballot measures for star voting. It's our preferred method, and we've had a couple of ballot initiatives in Oregon already. And the first one came close to passing. It was brand new. This is back in 2018. And so it gained a lot of support. But the more recent one that we did failed. And a big part of that, in our estimation, I would say, was that big money came in to oppose it. And then there was another smaller one just this election cycle in a small town in Oregon, and people were confusing it with ranked choice voting. And so that gave it a bad luster as well. Is that pretty much your take on what happened there?
Yeah, star voting was on the ballot in Eugene, Oregon, during the May primary and didn't pass. A lot of people, especially our election officials, were concerned about what might have happened if star voting passed locally, but ranked choice passed statewide, because ranked choice was on the ballot statewide, star voting was on the ballot for Eugene. And then, and like you said, we had big money opposition, really muddying the waters intentionally. And the ranked choice lobby actually came out, spent over $100,000 to oppose star voting in Eugene directly. And they opposed it with, a smear campaign, which in retrospect, I do take that as a compliment. This was star voting's kind of early showing. Star voting has really topped the charts in studies and in the electoral science, but it hasn't been used in a real municipal election yet. So this was our chance to really put the proposal forward to the public and allow people to try and poke holes in it. What we found is that the accusations that were leveled were just largely like wildly false, completely easily debunkable, alarmist tactics. If they had had real criticisms, that's where they would have put them forward. But I think star voting actually passed that test. and they had to make up a tax.
In a second, I want to ask you about your thoughts about the big money opposing star voting as well as the big money behind ranked choice voting. But first, I want to clarify the reason there were two different types of voting reforms up for voters to decide was that we started a signature petition very early on for the Eugene ballot measure, but the ranked choice voting measure was passed by the legislature fairly quickly, so we didn't know that that was going to be on the ballot until we were already in the process. That's my memory. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, and that's been really the trend in Oregon over the last 7 years. We've had democratic processes where the voting reform movement, the boots on the ground, look at the options, say, what do we want to go forward with, and decide on star voting. And then big money or the legislature or kind of more powerful forces in the space trump that decision and say, no, we're going to do it our way. And ranked choice really is the one with the name recognition. It's the one with the big money in the voting reform landscape. So yeah, we've seen this time and time again where, one example is in Portland, Oregon, they had a charter reform commission who put forward a voting method recommendation. And their research committee recommended star voting after interviewing a bunch of experts and looking into multiple proposals. They recommended our proposal. But the larger committee, who hadn't done that research, trumped that recommendation, went forward with a ranked choice voting package, which the election results coming out of Portland from a couple weeks ago here are showing that it didn't deliver on the promises that had been made, that voter turnout actually plummeted instead of increasing, and a number of other problems. Yeah, the same really happened with the legislature. We had a local and a statewide ballot initiative for star voting, and then the legislature comes in and puts their recommendation on the ballot instead.
And I recall
What
somebody looked at campaign donations to a lot of the legislature, a lot of legislators in the state legislature, and there was some connection between the ranked choice voting lobby and people who voted to put this on the ballot and money going into campaign coffers. Am I
Yeah,
right, or is that speculative, or what?
when the legislature really rammed through ranked choice voting in the 11th hour, we saw a lot of red flags there and decided to do a deeper dive into the campaign finance. And what we found was that almost everyone who had voted yes on the bill had received contributions from the ranked choice voting lobby before the vote. And then many of them received a larger donation after the vote. So it does look like quid pro quo. It looks very concerning. And we put together a slide that I'll share here that kind of summarizes that. But all in all, and this is not money that was spent on the campaign. This is just money that was directly donated from the ranked choice voting campaign to sitting legislators who had a vote. So President of the Senate, who was in charge of, making sure the bill made it to the floor, received $25,000. Senator Lieber received $16,000. He was chair of the Rules Committee, so he was in charge of making sure it got a vote in the committee to bring it to the floor, and so on down the list, with over $100,000 total being donated directly in lobbying to legislators. So when I say there's corruption in the anti-corruption space, this is what it looks like. This is literally what appears to be buying votes. Unfortunately, quid pro quo is harder to actually prove. Anyone can donate to a campaign, and we did have a couple of these legislators say, I didn't receive a donation, and we're like, well, actually you did. And they're like, well, I don't pay attention to every single donation that comes in. So they have plausible deniability, but the fact remains that this isn't just one donation. This is a coordinated plan of exchanging money for getting policy that is not necessarily the best policy.
So we see a lot of money promoting ranked choice voting, and we see money being spent to oppose other types of voting reform, and we see money given to candidates, at least with the hope that it will encourage people to vote for ranked choice voting measures, if not outright expecting people to vote just because they want to get the money. So any idea where all this money is coming from? Like what's behind it? Like who wants this to pass so badly that they're putting all this money into it?
Unfortunately, because of, we have Citizens United in the US, we really don't have national transparency on money in politics. So a lot of these donations were donated by super PACs to this campaign and then donated from the campaign to the legislature, or in the case of the opposition, it was donated from super PACs to a variety of entities that are all ranked choice voting lobbying entities. And then from there, donated to a new PAC. So there's like multiple pass-throughs. But it does work as a coordinated lobby. So in terms of who is behind the money, if we followed it back to the original source, there's a lot of speculation we can do, but I'll save your viewers that, just because it's not something we can really speak to concretely, because that's why they call it dark money.
That would be my job to speculate. Your job is to give us the facts, right? Well, there's definitely something behind it. I mean, that's one thing we can say for sure. There's a lot of money being spent to promote this and a lot of money being spent to oppose other types of voting reform. And the motives are not real clear at this stage, unless these people really believe this is the best type of voting reform. And that's hard to believe if they've given it the close look at how it's actually turning out in practice. So we should probably at least do a brief primer on how ranked choice voting works in the simplest possible terms for those of you who are for the members of the audience who are aware that this has been a thing, but all they know about it is, okay, I get my ballot and I get to rank the candidates in some order. My first choice, second choice, third choice. What happens when the ballots go to the people who count them or the machines that count them?
Yeah, so again, there are better ways to count a ranked ballot, but unfortunately they have not been used. They're not promoted widely. So when you hear ranked ballots anywhere in the world, they're pretty much talking about this one system that we're going to explain here, ranked choice voting, formerly known as instant runoff. And the way it works is you rank your candidates, you count just the first choice votes. And if one candidate has a majority of first choice votes, then they win. If not, you eliminate the candidate who has the least number of first choice votes, and you reallocate those ballots to those voters' next choice if possible. Some voters are not going to have a next choice. They left everybody else blank. They're allowed to do that. So their vote would then become exhausted and it doesn't count towards the majority anymore. So from the second round on, you're looking for a candidate to have a majority of active remaining votes. And so you continue like that, counting the top choice vote on each ballot, eliminating the candidate who came in last place, and reallocating those votes until somebody has a majority of remaining votes.
So this is essentially very much like the familiar system that we have where there's a set of candidates in your first choice. You're picking one candidate and then they're just counting that first choice. And it's the usual, whoever gets the most votes would be ahead, but you got to get a majority. And since there's not always a majority, then you go through this runoff process where somebody's eliminated because they didn't do well, and then some of all their votes, if they're able to be reallocated, are reallocated, and you do the same thing. So it sounds pretty complicated even when I try to explain it, and essentially it's hard to follow, right? it's hard for the average voter to understand what happened when something goes wrong, but it can go wrong in ways that are similar to the system we now have.
Exactly. One way to explain it is it's like you just do the current system, but you repeat it with less and less candidates until somebody has a majority of remaining voters who haven't, dropped off along the way. And, the definition of insanity is repeating something over and over and expecting to get different results. So it has a number of issues. It can eliminate the candidate who is preferred over all others just right out the gates.
Which is what
It,
happened in Alaska.
right. It can hurt the candidate in the middle, specifically if there's a strong underdog candidate who is actually pretty popular, but maybe isn't going to win ultimately. Those are the voters who are the most likely to be hurt under a ranked choice voting system.
And
Because your worst case scenario is, as a voter, you've ranked some candidates, your favorite makes it to the final round, and then they're eliminated. Because in that case, my favorite's lost, but my second choice was never counted.
mhm. So that's the big thing for the average voter to keep in mind is that your vote, those rankings may never make a difference in the outcome, depending on how the process, who gets eliminated when and who you ranked in what order and all that. Very unpredictable. I also want to mention the problem of larger scale districts because you referred to that very early on that it can work better in a small district like a city or a county where all the votes are counted in one place pretty much. But in larger jurisdictions, there's a problem, and that's how would you explain that in a way that somebody could understand it? And I think this is part of the reason why, or at least I was skeptical of the Oregon measure as opposed to Maine or Alaska, because Maine and Alaska have small populations and Oregon's not huge, but we have a lot of different vote counting counties. And if you're doing a statewide ranked choice voting, somehow you got to bring those together.
Yeah, that gets to the heart of it. So in ranked choice, because you're not counting most of the rankings in most elections or most competitive elections, you actually need to fully centralize all of the ballots. So that means you have to truck all the ballots to a centralized location or digitally send all of the ballot data online, which obviously both of those are huge security issues in terms of chain of custody and fraud or error, introducing errors in the process. So what we found is that election laws tend to be quite robust. They tend to require local tabulation of ballots and local auditing. You should be able to audit a subset of ballots and all of that kind of thing, so that if errors are made along the way, they're caught right away and they can be corrected before you publish the results. But with ranked choice, those kinds of best practices are impossible because you're not actually counting all the ballot data. And so we saw New York City in 2021, they ran their election for, it was mayor, Democratic Party mayoral election, and they accidentally added 135,000 test ballots that they had used to test the system before running the real election, and then they forgot to clear the record. So they added a bunch of 135,000 fake ballots. They didn't notice. They reported incorrect results to the public, and they were actually caught by a third party, by a candidate who said, we've done exit polling and our records show way less people. The same thing happened the following year in Oakland, California. In this case, it was a tabulation error where they did the steps of ranked choice voting in the wrong order. So it got into kind of a wonky detail about voters who are filling out their ballots a little bit incorrectly, but it should still be counted as the voter intended. And they actually mistallied every single ranked choice election, and seated the wrong candidate in one case. The wrong candidate took office, and it wasn't until 50 days later that a third party doing data analysis discovered that they had just mistallied everything and that it all needed to be redone. That kind of mistake in tabulating elections is unheard of. Obviously, we hear a lot about election security, election integrity these days, but just historically, something like that had never happened and never should happen. There should be 8 million checks and balances that would catch any sort of error like that along the way.
So that's really two sides of this. One is that it's easy to screw up the counting process, and the second side of it is it's harder to find those mistakes in a timely fashion, if at all. Sometimes you may not even know.
Yeah, and I should say in both the New York and the California example, from what we know, it looks like those were honest mistakes. It looks like you had a super convoluted system and election officials did their best but messed up. But obviously, it would be much more vulnerable to intentional fraud, election fraud as well. And as one of the great military superpowers of the world, with tons of outside foreign influences who care very much about who wins our elections, having a not secure voting method is just not something we should be playing with. So, when people ask, why is all this dark money supporting this reform if we know it's broken? The worst case scenario is that it makes election fraud easier to get away with and harder to catch. The more reasonable explanation, or the more the less alarming one, is just that people like to win, and there are people who've been working on this for years and years, and they've kind of have sunk cost and are continuing to throw good money after bad and failing to, adapt and change and upgrade their proposal over time.
Okay, so we've talked about how the ranked choice voting has failed in certain ways, and some of the reasons why, and how it actually works, and the big money that seems to be behind us. Let's move now to the preferred method that your organization has identified, which is star voting. So our viewers have some idea how this works differently from ranked choice voting, because in a sense, they sound very similar. In both, you have the opportunity to give more information about your views of candidates than if you simply are asked to pick one, and that's all you get to say. So star voting, run us through, what does a ballot look like? And then what do they do with that information when they count the votes?
From a voter's perspective, star voting is very similar. It's expressive, you show your preferences, whether or not your favorite can win, your vote automatically goes to the finalist you prefer. It gets a majority preferred winner. It's safe to vote your conscience. You don't have to worry about wasting your vote. So if any of that sounds familiar, that is exactly the elevator pitch that I had originally heard for ranked choice voting, but star voting actually delivers. So star voting was specifically invented to try and deliver on the claims that ranked choice voting advocates were making, while addressing the serious criticisms that the election science community had highlighted and has been, really blowing the whistle about for decades now. So how it works is you score your candidates from 0 worst all the way up to 5 best. So give your favorite candidate 5 stars. You can give your second choice 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 star. You can score candidates equally if you like them equally. And you can leave people blank if you don't want to support them at all. So blank is the same as 0. It means I don't like this person and I don't want to vote for them at all. It's counted in a 2-step process. So star stands for score, then automatic runoff. And so step 1, you add up all of the ballots, find the 2 high scoring candidates overall. Those are your finalists. And then in the second round, instead of counting stars, you're counting voters. Each voter's ballot is essentially one person, one vote, just like a traditional vote. And your full vote automatically goes to the finalist you preferred. So you get a majority preferred winner. The finalist with the most votes wins. And it very naturally complies with election law all over the country because of that.
So rather than the potential for multiple rounds of recounting, there's always only two steps.
Yeah, there's only two rounds. All the ballot data is counted, and you're able to show not just who you prefer to who, but also how much or how little you like those candidates.
Okay. Maybe at another point in time, we could talk about the open primary concept a little bit more fully, but this, I think, is plenty of information to assimilate already. Was there anything you wanted to add to what we've already discussed?
Yeah, so I think a really important distinction, especially for people who might have tried ranked choice voting and didn't like it, is that star voting is much more user friendly. So let's say there's 10 candidates on your ballot. With star voting, because you can give people equal scores, you can score all of the candidates if you want to. Again, you don't have to, but you can easily score as many or as few candidates as you want. And there's no risk of accidentally messing up your ballot. So it's pretty difficult to uniquely rank first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and fill in a field of bubbles perfectly without repeating any ranks. And if you do give two candidates the same ranking on a ranked choice ballot, that voids your ballot. So that's one of the most common voter errors. You're also not allowed to skip rankings. So, if you rank somebody first choice, second choice, fourth choice, fifth choice, all of those are voter errors that can make your ballot uncountable. With star voting, any way you fill out your ballot is fine. You can score the candidates kind of in tiers, like grading. You can say, these are my favorites. They're great. These ones are all pretty good too. These are fine. These are really not that great. And these ones are awful. So it is it's just the easiest way to collect nuanced information on public opinion. So that's why the 5-star rating has been the gold standard in surveying and public opinion measuring for a long time. And star voting just really applies that to something like voting for the first time.
Okay, so to finish up, if somebody wants to dive more deeply into I got two questions to this. Where to go to learn more and dive a little more deeply into this. And if you want to help Star Voting get further, where do you go to learn how to do that? So there's two things.
Yeah, so our nonprofit is the Equal Vote Coalition, and our website is equal.vote. We also have another branch that is the Star Voting Project, and you can learn more about star voting over at starvoting.org. So Equal Vote Coalition is really focused on research, coalition building, voter education, more of the big picture. And at the point where you're like, wow, star voting sounds amazing. How do we get it passed? How do we get it implemented? The way to go is to go to starvoting.org and check out that website. You can join, you can get involved. There's tons of ways to help, no matter how much time you have or where you live or what your skills are.
So the one organization, Equal Vote, is more the research and education, and the other one is more political action oriented.
Yeah, two organizations that do kind of Venn diagram and work together really closely.
And I recall somebody snapped up a different Star Voting type website address. And I just wanted to warn people on that if that's still misdirecting people somewhere. Could you say a bit about that?
Yeah, so we like to do all of our decision making, as democracy nerds, we like to really consult people and have a lot of bottom up decision making. So back in 2017, we decided to rename star voting to what ultimately became star voting. But we did some like public, asking people what they thought about the name. And sure enough, the founder of the largest ranked choice voting lobbyist group ended up just buying the URL, the domain name, starvoting.org and starvoting.com as well. We've since been able to buy back starvoting.org from him, which is how we know who it was. But starvoting.com still does redirect to a hostile website.
How much did that cost? Can you reveal that?
It was hundreds of dollars. I think it was under 1,000, but yeah,
Oh,
a lot of
seems
money for a small, mostly independent donation funded organization. So I guess I should say, if you do want to support our work, equal.vote/donate. We can't do it without you. And we are currently fundraising just for our basic program development, but we have a lot of really exciting programs coming up for the next year.
well, thank you very much for coming on the show to explain these things to people that may know more or less, but are interested in finding out more. And I will be talking to you in the future. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your work, Alan, as always.